Welcome to day 136 of the Daily Bread Bible Study, here for Friday, May 15th, 2020, focusing on 2 Chronicles 32 through 34. So when it's good for Judah, it is good for Judah. And when it is bad for Judah, it is bad for Judah. So we will get to see today setting up for next time the fall of Judah. But we will get to see how God is going to preserve Judah and God's leaders here in 2 Chronicles 32. So we pick it up with the story of King Hezekiah in a similar story to 2 Kings 19, as we discussed on day 115. We see Assyria seek to capture Jerusalem as well. They just had sacked Israel a few chapters ago. And so in the parallel for Judah, King Hezekiah prepares the kingdom and for invasion and instructs his people, saying in 2 Chronicles 32:7, "Be strong and of good courage. Don't be afraid or dismayed before the king of Assyria and all the horde that is with him. For there is one greater with us than with him." Now when King Sennacherib of Assyria comes, he mocks their trust in God, saying in verse 15, "Now therefore do not let Hezekiah deceive you or mislead you in this fashion, and do not believe him. For no God of any nation or kingdom has been able to save his people from my hand or from the hand of my ancestors. How much less will your God save you out of my hand?" Pretty arrogant. With the help of the prophet Isaiah, King Hezekiah prays to God. And the Lord sends deliverance in the form of an angel who cuts off the mighty men of the king of Assyria. Now, remember, covenant, we have the word, to make a covenant. It's also literally to cut a covenant. And the opposite of being included in a covenant, it cut for you is being cut off. And so here we have this idea that this angel is not only cutting them up, but cutting them off of any sort of connection with God. So King Sennacherib heads home in disgrace and then is murdered by a conspiracy in the house of his God. And so the Assyrian king is overthrown, and Hezekiah and Judah find peace again. Now King Hezekiah then becomes sick and prays to God again for healing. God shows this king mercy, yet Hezekiah apparently has belittled this healing and the sign associated with it. Though it's not mentioned here in 2 Chronicles, we have 1 Kings to thank for that sign, which the prophet Isaiah turns back the sundial 10 intervals. And so God turns back time for King Hezekiah, which is a beautiful sign, but Hezekiah disregards it at first. Then eventually, King Hezekiah humbles himself, and God pushes back any destruction for a time after he dies. Without mentioning the details of 2 Kings, our text for today references the envoys of Babylon. This is the worst sin of King Hezekiah, because King Hezekiah shows the Babylonian envoy all of his possessions, and the prophet Isaiah promises that these goods will be inherited by the king of Babylon. 2 Chronicles 33, we see that Hezekiah's focus on God is then subverted through the next king named Manasseh. So King Manasseh does what is evil in the sight of the Lord. It is a long list, including he rebuilt the high places of, to worship of foreign gods, erected altars to Baal. And if you remember, Baal is not a good word. It is a dirty word for these people and the leaders of the kings of Judah. So Baal worship is instituted. He made sacred poles, which is to a specific god. The Ashtartes, or I forget how it's pronounced, but worshipped all the host of heaven, which is confusing to me. Is this a pantheon sort of reference? I think I've discussed this before, and it was still confusing. He brought idolatry into the temple, made his sons pass through the fire, which is an abominable practice, and then also includes practicing sorcery and soothsaying, among other things, which are forbidden there for the law of the Lord. All this he does and provokes the Lord to great anger. In 2 Chronicles 33:9, we see that it's his time in his youth as a leader is summed up in this way. Manasseh misled Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, so that they did more evil than all the nations whom the Lord had destroyed before the people of Israel. That's pretty bad. After getting captured by the Babylonians, Manasseh repents and is rescued to Jerusalem and sees the Lord indeed is God. So it at least ends on a good note here in the 2 Chronicles version. He tries to undo what he has done, and upon his death, his son, King Ammon, continues in the sins of his forefathers. King Ammon is murdered by conspiracy, and then those conspirators are then murdered as well too. And so, as I've said before, violence ends in violence. And the ways of the Lord, when they're disregarded, it's violent and not peaceful. On the upswing of all of this, a young king will arise to lead the reformation of the people. And that is, as we've talked about before, this king named Josiah. Now, Josiah begins his reign at the age of 8, and he seeks the Lord at a young age, and 4 years later begins to purge the land of foreign gods, which goes to show that the law of the Lord and following the Lord can be done by anybody of any age, and that God will bless them. So the works of King Josiah, on a positive note towards God, is that he undoes most of what Manasseh did. He removes Baal worship from the land, and especially from the Temple of Solomon. He kills the priest of false worship and eliminates idols. He also repairs the Temple of Solomon, the Temple of the Lord. And additionally, he finds the book of the law again. The priest Hilkiah sends the book with Shaphan, who reads the words before King Josiah. And upon hearing the law, Josiah tears his clothes. He realizes the responsibility he as king is to maintain what Moses instructed, and then leads the kingdom in obeying the Lord according to the book of the law. The priest Huldah is consulted, who confirms that, yes, disaster is imminent. King Josiah, due to his humble heart, though, will not have to endure the destruction of Judah in his lifetime, according to the prophet Huldah. Now, with that assurance, King Josiah doesn't just sit back, but he invites the people together to hear the book of the law read out loud. Josiah then renews the covenant with the law of God, with the law and God, and then obeys, all of the people of Israel then obey the law for the rest of his days as king. This includes a special Passover meal, which we will discuss more time. We've discussed it previously, but that's our teaser for next time. Thank you for joining me for day 136 of the Daily Bread Bible Study.